Hi everyone, thank you for joining us today. My name is Laura Cutlip and I'm a policy advisor with the Western Governors Association. Welcome to today's webinar celebrating the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act, Reimagining Disability Employment in the Rural West. This webinar is part of a series under the WGA Chairs Initiative of North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum, Reimagining the Rural West. You can find recordings of the previous webinars on the initiatives page at WGA's website, westgov.org. We will start by allowing each of our panelists to give opening remarks, followed by a question and answer discussion moderated by WGA's Executive Director, Jim Ogsbury, who will also be incorporating audience questions to inform the discussion. To send in questions, use the chat function on the left of your screen and address them to the presenter that the question is intended for. You may submit questions at any point, and I will pass them to Jim for his use during the discussion. Thank you again for tuning in, and I will now turn it over to Jim.
Thanks very much, Laura. As Laura just explained, today's webinar celebrating the 30th anniversary of the ADA, Reimagining Disability Employment Policy in the Rural West, is being produced in connection with Reimagining the Rural West, the Chairs Initiative of North Dakota Governor and WGA Chairman Doug Burgum. During the course of this initiative, we are performing an extensive examination of issues surrounding life in the rural West, particularly with respect to economic development, infrastructure, and quality of life. Life in the rural West is different, and we know that the rural West is facing particular challenges right now in the context of the current public health crisis, with especially limited access to personal protective equipment and testing technology, with a spate of rural hospital closures in the past few years, and with insufficient access to rural broadband, making telework and delivery of telehealth even more challenging. Today we're going to do a deep dive on a topic of life in the rural West that does not get nearly enough attention: the unique challenges and opportunities for the disabled to fully participate in rural life. According to American Community Survey data, 15% of people living in rural areas have some sort of disability. That compares to a national average of 12.6%. So not only are there more disabled people in rural areas, they arguably face greater challenges, including fewer work opportunities, limited transportation options, and a lack of infrastructure to support adaptive technologies. On July 26th, the United States will celebrate the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, landmark legislation designed to ensure a more inclusive America, an America in which every citizen has the right to fully participate in all aspects of society, including employment. This anniversary provides states an opportunity to celebrate the progress of their efforts to date and to identify the remaining actions required to remove barriers and improve employment opportunities for people with disabilities. As Western governors lead the nation with respect to policy around rural opportunity, connectivity, and community, we're confident that they will continue to demonstrate leadership in this area as well. WGA is pleased to present this webinar in collaboration with SEED, the State Exchange on Employment and Disability. SEED is a major federal partner of WGA in executing the Reimagining the Rural West initiative, and we couldn't be more appreciative of SEED's financial and intellectual contributions to our efforts. Today, we are joined by 4 panelists who will discuss initiatives and policy options for creating inclusive employment opportunities and the importance of such inclusivity to the construction of a healthy and vibrant rural West. Bobby Silverstein is a principal at the law firm of Powers, Piles, Sutter, and Verville, PC, where his practice focuses on the areas of disability, healthcare, rehabilitation, employment, education, social security, and civil rights. For over a decade, Mr. Silverstein served in various capacities on Capitol Hill, including as staff director and chief counsel to the U.S. Senate Subcommittee on Disability Policy, where he was the behind-the-scenes architect of 20 bills enacted into law, including the Americans with Disabilities Act and several reauthorizations of the Rehabilitation Act and the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Mr. Silverstein is also a member of the SEED team, for which he drafts policy briefs and provides policy assistance to state lawmakers. Dr. Aaron Banger currently serves as the chair of the Texas Governor's Committee on People with Disabilities, director of compliance at AT&T, and chair of Disability in Central Texas. He is a certified human factors professional, certified professional in accessibility core competencies, and holds over 30 U.S. patents. He previously worked at AT&T Labs, and he has served as a technical and policy expert on accessibility and disability issues for the Federal Communications Commission, Council of State Governments, various NGOs, and the U.S. Technical Advisory Group to the International Standards Organization. Kathy West Evans is the Director of Business Relations at the Council of State Administrators of Vocational Rehabilitation. Kathy started her professional career as a vocational consultant and manager of the Projects with Industry program at the Hearing, Speech, and Deafness Center in Seattle. She moved into the Washington State Division of Vocational Rehabilitation in 1983 as a vocational rehabilitation counselor for consumers who are deaf, deafblind, or hard of hearing. Kathy is the co-founder of the Access Conference, Job Fair, Technology, and Resource Expo for business and people with disabilities. That event has been held annually in the Seattle area since 1944. She's also worked as a vocational rehabilitation specialist for the Region 10 Office of Rehabilitation Services Administration, serving as the state representative to Oregon and Alaska, as well as the regional specialist in the areas of employment, business development, and the ADA. Kristen Vandergriff is the Executive Director of the Alaska Governor's Council on Disabilities and Special Education, where she has worked since 2013. Previously, Kristen worked for the Division of Senior and Disability Services in the Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities Unit. Before coming to work for the state of Alaska, Kristen was employed with Hope Community Resources, working directly with people who experience disability. She has been an advocate for the disabled for nearly 20 years, and she's also volunteered extensively with the Special Olympics and was part of the 2001 Special Olympics World Winter Games. Each of these speakers is going to give a presentation, and they're going to speak in the order in which we were just introduced, which means we're going to start with Bobby. So, Bobby, thank you very much for being here, and we'll turn it over to you.
Hey, Jim, thank you so much for this opportunity to share some thoughts with you. Jim gave you some of the data to give you a context for this. Disability is more prevalent in rural areas, which makes it even more of a critical issue for us to focus on. Jim also shared with you that July 26th is, in fact, the 30th anniversary of the ADA. I had the privilege and opportunity to work with senators on the adoption of the ADA, and the sponsor, Senator Harkin, chief sponsor from Iowa, referred to the ADA as the 20th century emancipation proclamation for people with disability. It is landmark legislation because it provides every person with the right to fully participate in all aspects of society: employment, state and local services, public accommodations, that is, businesses open to the public, and telecommunication through the relay system. Now, the ADA has 4 goals, and these are the goals of disability policy articulated by Congress for the nation: equality of opportunity, full participation, independent living, and economic self-sufficiency. And these goals are totally consistent with the themes of the WGA Chairman's Initiative for Opportunity, Community, and Connectivity. Now, I will explain shortly that I'm legislative counsel for the SEED project, State Exchange on Employment and Disability. And we work closely with WGA, National Governors Association, National Conference of State Legislators, Council of State Governments, and others. And we have heard from them that, there's a window of opportunity that the 30th anniversary presents. And that opportunity is not only to celebrate successes and highlight progress, but also encourage the private sector to take additional steps to recruit, hire, retain, and advance people with disabilities. But we're also hearing from state and local policymakers that this is also an opportunity to identify policy options that achieve the ADA's goals and reflect the Western Governors Association Chairman's initiative. Now, what is the State Exchange on Employment with Disabilities? It is a really unique project. Oftentimes, as you all know, the federal government provides grant money, and they basically say, this is what we expect. There are state plans and reports, and it's kind of top-down. This is a totally different approach. This approach says there are these state intermediaries, including WGA and others, who provide resources to their peers, to their colleagues, to their members. And the C project says, can we work together amongst these groups and experts to provide resources for these state intermediaries so they can help provide additional resources and technical and policy assistance to make the workforce more inclusive for people with disabilities. So, more specifically, what kind of resources does the SEED project provide? We provide policy assistance, subject matter expertise. We share resources from other states so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Provide different kinds of tools, sample policy options that can be customized for your particular state, data, as well as connections to federal agencies. And here are an example of some of the things, resources that we provide. A number of state policymakers got together with a number of disability policy experts, had a group met on multiple occasions, a task force, and developed a report called Work Matters, a framework for states on workforce development for people with disabilities. This document includes hundreds of examples of policy options that your colleagues around the country have developed. And there, in the electronic version, there are links to each of these policy options. They deal with state as a model employer, engaging the private sector, telecommunications, accessible information and communication technology, transportation, youth initiatives, disability-owned businesses, stay-at-work, return-to-work, amongst other topics. In fact, the Council of State Government has developed a specific toolkit, which includes a range of examples on stay-at-work, return-to-work. One of the model policies, the exemplary policy, is from the state of Washington, and another is the state of Oregon that are profiled in the document. CSG had just completed a future of a workforce task force and had a preliminary report, again, providing examples of policies that have been developed around the country and a bunch of recommendations on issues ranging from artificial intelligence to the impact of the gig economy. NCSL has a state legislative database, and the SEED, what we do is sometimes the state says, These are the policies that we've done, but we want to know what other states have done on state as a model employer or transportation. And we will provide a policy brief for the state on that particular issue. Now, the Work Matters report was completed in 2016, but every month we have an update, so we know exactly what legislation has been enacted between 2016 and the present on any of these topic areas, as well as bills that are currently pending before various state legislatures. And we're also working now with more local policymakers. So it could be a policy brief that is state specific, or we have folks have said, "Help! Can you help us? We need to know what's happening in the area of transportation," and we have developed generic policy briefs on various topics. Now, recently, a number of states and local communities, policymakers, have said to us, "Can you develop examples for us of specific proclamations that we may want to do commemorating the 30th anniversary?" So in response to requests by state and local policymakers, we have developed, we have responded to their requests. And so an example of one of the things we did for a policymaker was a proclamation recognizing, commemorating the 30th anniversary. And what this proclamation, this draft done for, this was done for local policymakers as well as the state, is recognizes what we call the old and new paradigm of disability policy. The old paradigm looked at people with disabilities as defective and need of fixing. The new paradigm recognized that disability, like race and gender, is a natural part of the human experience. We articulate the goals of disability policy, the role of the disability community, state, local governments, and the private sector in fostering equal opportunity for people with disabilities. And we recognize, and this is key, bipartisanship. Folks wanted us to recognize this because disability policy is historically bipartisan. Recognize the principle of universal design, that if we design items, whether it's a building or a website or a program that recognizes the needs of the greatest number of folks with different functional needs, we're likely to not have to provide a greater number of accommodations, meeting the needs of the greatest number of folks in the initial design stage. And also the recognizing persistent discrimination and addressing new barriers. So the proclamation that we drafted recognizes and commemorates the anniversary, encourages private sector and public to celebrate advancements and make a recommitment. A second a policy or executive order joint resolution was states have said, could you specifically help us use the anniversary as a means for having an infrastructure or a state-specific review of how we're doing with respect to policy impacting the employment of people with disabilities. And they asked for us to establish a task force and to describe the responsibilities. Other states have not established a separate task force, but have developed a strategic plan. In this approach that we did for others, we recognized first the anniversary of the ADA, and then recognized the reality that the employment rate is still lower for people with disabilities proportional to non-disabled folks. And then suggest forming a task force, and some of the topics were the same topics basically that we included in Work Matters: state as a model employer, interagency collaboration and coordination, both with respect to employment first, that recognizes that competitive integrated employment is the primary or presumed outcome, as well as interaction between VR and American job centers, engagement of the private sector, accessible transportation and ICT, and disability-owned businesses. And just so you know, the draft, this policy that was developed for other states, actually for each of these topic areas has examples from Work Matters, 5 or 6 examples under each. And the reason we did it that way, they asked for more so that they could customize it for their own state by crossing out, now we don't really want to focus on that issue. So it's longer than would a typical task force or joint resolution, because we include more than is necessary and allowing folks to easily cross things out. I can be reached. Here's my email and telephone, private line, call anytime you like. Nadia Mossberg, who is our Office of Disability Employment Policy liaison, here's her number and email. Thank you.
Bobby, thank you. You obviously have such a rich history with ADA and with these issues, and that was certainly reflected in your presentation. I look forward to your participation in the discussion following the other
Thank you,
presenters. And the next one is Aaron Banger. Aaron.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the intersection of technology and disability employment policy. So both of those topics by themselves cover quite a bit of territory. We don't have all day to cover this. I'm going to just try to hit the highlights, and hopefully it will spur some good questions afterwards. So I really like the reimagining the rural West and thinking about reimagining disability employment policy and what role technology can play in that. On the next slide, there we go. Next slide, I have some language from the ADA. Maybe, Bobby, your own pen wrote these, and I'm not going to cover this, but basically it's the provision of the ADA that prevents or outlaws discrimination based on disability in the hiring and the other terms of employment. So we take that as the goal, as what we're looking for as a society to happen. Well, let's look at the data. So in 2019, according to Bureau of Labor Statistics, 19.3% of persons with disabilities were employed in the U.S. For persons without disability, that was 66.3%. So obviously quite a large gap there. When you think about what's technology's role in that, certainly the first step in getting a job is to being able to apply for those jobs, to let an employer know that you're interested. Some research that was done a few years back and reported in the Work Matters report that Bobby alluded to, 46% of individuals with disabilities said that their last online job application process was difficult or impossible to complete because of lack of accessibility in that process. And that accessibility, more and more these days, the job application, the job search, any testing that goes with that, interviewing even, is being mediated through technology. And so technology plays not only an ever increasing role in the workplace once jobs are being performed, but obviously a really important part of getting that job in the first place. So if we were to imagine how can technology really help us with reimagining disability employment policy, and especially reimagining it in the rural West, we actually have a lot of technologies to draw on. I've got a word cloud up here full with a bunch of 2, 3, 4 letter acronyms on things, and for the most part, keeping up with these and figuring out how they're going to work and what they do in terms of employment is going to make most people's heads spin. So I won't bore you with what all those stand for and what they mean and how they can help us. But to really focus on a couple things. I was interviewed recently for an article about some work I did with AT&T on smart cities, and the quote that the author of that article pulled out that I don't even remember saying, but I like it, and particularly for this discussion, is technology is not the limiting factor anymore. The limiting factor is us. And what I meant by that was technology has the power to do so many things that help improve employment outcomes and the full and equal participation in society of people with disabilities. How we are using that technology and the thought we put into who are we designing the technology for really is the limiting factor. And so understanding that for technology to actually work, yes, it needs to function, but if people can't make it do what it's supposed to do, then is it really working for us? And not just us, the 75%, 80% of people without disabilities in this country, but all 100% of people, is it really working? And to do that, I really encourage people to think of users first and not the technology. What is it that we need to do to ensure that full and equal access to employment opportunities, but the other full and meaningful access to the rest of what society has to offer? I've got 2 examples of how technology is doing this, but I want you to think about what the underlying human need is here as it applies to people with disabilities, but really more generally. So IRA is a company that AT&T's worked with for a few years and helped them with some of their growth. It is a pair of smart glasses, though you can use your smartphone as well, that streams high definition video from where the user is to remote agents that can be really anywhere in the country. And the intention here is that individuals with vision loss can wear these glasses and explore their surroundings, and that remote agent, when needed on an on-call basis, can help them by describing the environment around them. That could be reading a menu in a restaurant. It could be in a workplace. It could be navigating their physical environment. This really takes
Aaron, did you
high.
Aaron, did
No,
you
I'm
mean
still
to
on.
advance the slide? Okay.
No, I'm still on. Should say technology is an enabler, not a silver bullet. So hopefully that's the slide that's showing right now. So IRA really relies on high capacity particularly wireless broadband networks. It also is very important to have real time. So it's one thing to stream that video, it's another thing for that video to lag, because if you're walking down the sidewalk and there's an obstacle coming up, you certainly don't want the lag between sending that video and that person seeing it and reporting it back to the IRA Explorer to end up having them crash into it or anything like that. Real-time automated captioning is a very important tool. It's being enabled by artificial intelligence and machine learning and these sorts of things. But in real-time calls like this, or watching TV, streaming video on the internet and so forth, having access for folks that are deaf or hard of hearing is important to make sure that full and equal access to the content is being there. It can be very logistically challenging to provide human captioning on everything that's going on these days, especially as things are more remote, and so that automated caption can help fill a big and growing gap, especially right now. Bobby mentioned universal design. It can yield something we call electronic curb cuts. That is, things that are designed for people with disabilities, like the curb cuts of sidewalks that were designed for people that use wheelchairs, but really benefit everybody. And those curb cuts benefit people that are, pushing a stroller or pulling luggage, those sorts of things, and text messaging and spell check. And there's dozens of other examples of technologies that were created to specifically solve an accessibility concern, but really benefit all of us. I think one of the key gaps here is that accessible technology is not, how you build accessible technology is not a widespread skill at this point. You'd think that, with 20%, 25%, depending on the stat you look at, of the U.S. population, and certainly higher in rural communities having disabilities, that this would be something that technologists and educators would be teaching a lot of, but there's some work being done by a group called Teach Access that have found that is very much, very rare to have accessible technology skills in technologists. Really the common enabler that we're seeing in the 21st century, both of the technology itself as well as individuals and people, is broadband and enabling high-speed access, which has traditionally been wired and now increasingly wireless with LTE and 5G coming online. It enables telework, which has long been used as a job accommodation for people with disabilities, but both real barriers, particularly with broadband deployment, as well as imagined barriers about whether or not people can actually be productive in telework arrangements. Have limited that, but I think we're finding out right now due to the pandemic that we're able to do a lot more work remotely than we ever thought possible. And I think the key here is that innovation, which is something that drives more and more of our economy, it happens at the edges of the bell curve. The middle of the bell curve, the quote unquote normal curve, generally that's where everybody's kind of happy and content. The edges is where innovation does happen, because necessity is the mother of invention. And lastly, on some policy considerations come out here, obviously broadband. State as a model employer, I'm going to also sing the praises of the Work Matters report in terms of what that is, how states can walk the walk, particularly before it sets expectations with private employers about hiring people with disabilities. Encouraging entrepreneurship and self-employment. This is a great arrangement for people with disabilities to be able to tailor the work conditions to what best fits them. Representation on boards and councils of state governments and local governments. Doesn't even have to be disability related, but having people with disabilities represented on these groups make sure that the disability perspective is being counted. There's a refrain in the disability community: nothing about us without us. That the best people who know how to address accessibility and disability are people with disabilities. And lastly, accessible education and transportation and other workforce supports, particularly as more education happens digitally, to make sure those accessible technologies are embedded in there. And the last thing I'll leave you with is the term disabled in the context of work has traditionally been thought of as you can't work. You're disabled, ergo you can't work, and we need to provide some sort of support there. But having a disability does not equate to being disabled. That's not an oxymoron to talk about disability employment.
Well, Aaron, thank you very much for that presentation. And next we're going to turn to Kathy West Evans.
Thank you so much. Okay, I'll wait till Laura, oh, there we go. So good morning or afternoon, everyone, depending on where you're at. I work for the Council of State Administrators of Vocational Rehabilitation. I want to tell you just a moment what Voc Rehab is. Vocational Rehab is a state-federal partnership. So the programs that are under Voc Rehab have a federal-state match arrangement that are operated at the state level. So I work for those 78 directors of the state level programs. It's exciting to talk about 30 years of the ADA. We know that that's having an impact in how we look at work for all of us. I also wanted to let you know that this year is the 100-year anniversary of public vocational rehab in the U.S. And I think that's exciting because in 1918 with veterans, in 1920 with the general population, the U.S. Started recognizing that people with disabilities indeed have much to contribute to the workplace and independence, and that though disability can happen at any time during that employment life cycle, our goal is to keep our workforce working. So, I think those two pieces of legislation go hand in hand. We're looking at the ability of people, and though we may change the way we work, we all have contributions that we make to the workplace, and we need to keep doing that. So the National Employment Team, which I lead at the national level, is really driven by the field. There were many of us that were working in various states, and we started realizing that in many cases we're working with the same businesses, and that includes public and private sector. We also knew that we had individuals that were interested in moving between states. They may be currently living in one state, but they have family in another state. They want to relocate, whatever the case may be. So as we started realizing the connections, we started talking about the development of a dual customer strategy, understanding the businesses that we're working with, sharing that knowledge across states, and then also understanding candidates and their motivation, goals, career aspirations, and how we make the connections to support their employment anywhere in the country. So as we looked at how we do that, we sat down with 35 of our business customers from the private and public sector, and we asked them, what do we need to do differently? We're investing money, federal and state dollars, into careers for individuals, but you can't really do that without understanding what business needs. It's that whole strategy of begin with the end in mind. So we learned a lot of things from companies. Number one, when we work with a company, we'll often hear, we just don't know what we don't know and we're afraid to ask. So I think that Bobby, Aaron, Kristen, you would all agree that one of the biggest barriers that we face in terms of the employment of people with disabilities is that there's so much unknown. And it's important to develop relationships with our business customers, build the trust so that they'll ask us. If you have a visible disability and you come into an interview and an interviewer doesn't understand maybe blindness or you're in a wheelchair, how you could do the job and they can't ask, they are often left to make assumptions. And we want to stop that cycle. We want to bring education. We want to do it in a way that helps the business see the talent that we're working with, helps them build their candidate pipeline, and help support candidates in being ready for those positions. On the candidate side, again, we heard we want to look at opportunities at the national level, just like any other person starting a career. And we want to understand the company or the organization, and is that a fit for us, and what are the career opportunities? So we not only heard from individual candidates, but each of our agencies has a state rehabilitation council. And those state rehab councils include business members as well as individuals with disabilities, and those are governor appointed. So they help inform our policy and the direction of our program. So we're always looking for the input of that group as well. So again, we're looking at how we build out a team with all 78 agencies, which represent all states, the territories, and the District of Columbia. So with the NET, we started looking at the cross-state strategies. How do you build a strategy across a company or an organization? How do you look at an organization and not just their human resource side, but any work that a person does is impacted by the facilities, the staff training, the fiscal decisions of a company. So really starting to understand what a company looks like. And as we're doing that, how do we bring our partners on board? So there are two other large vocational rehab programs that sit across the country. One of them is the Veterans Administration, Voc Rehab and Employment, and the other one is the program that's funded called the American Indian Rehab Program, which covers Native Americans and Alaskan Natives. And then we work with a community partnerships in several locations. So we work with about 10,000 community agencies across the country as we're building out the strategies to support business and individual customers. I'm not going to go through this whole list, but I wanted you to see some of the different services that businesses helped us define. When do they need support? When do they want us to get involved? Several companies have training programs, internships. How do we use apprenticeship programs? Because we know that disability happens at any time during that employment life cycle. At the other end of things, we're also looking at retention supports. So you've got a great person working, something happens, a car accident, whatever. How do we keep someone productive in the workplace? So I think in the current situation, we're also seeing a lot of shift to home-based employment. So we're moving rapidly now as people are working, have been working in a workplace where they have a lot of the great assistive technology that you heard Erin talk about. How do we quickly move that to a home environment and keep people working? So reaching out to our partners and experts in that area to help us do that. We also know that we're working with a lot of individuals who are contractors or in small business. And how's that impacted in the current situation, and how do we keep those communication lines open for them? One of the tools that we developed through work with our partners, and it continues to grow, is a virtual platform, which is really getting a lot of traffic right now, and we're moving as quickly as we can. But we work to develop an accessible platform called the Talent Acquisition Portal. We developed it with a disability-owned company out of the San Diego area, because we knew that candidates, as you heard Erin talk about access, many people will go in and they'll apply on an online application system that isn't accessible. So how do we help people get connected in a way that's accessible? And that's what the Talent Acquisition Portal, or TAP, is. It allows candidates to connect with opportunities, and it allows business to have contacts with those candidates. For those companies we're working with that are federal contractors, it allows them to look at their traffic, how many people are applying for jobs, connect with people directly. We've also developed the virtual job fair hiring events, and we're building out the career sessions. So business is asking for online educational sessions on disability awareness. At the same time, we also have candidates who are asking for more information about companies, careers, et cetera. So our businesses, in exchange, will be doing those career sessions, as well as tips on online interviewing. There's a whole new strategy if you're interviewing online. Currently, we're working with about 600 recruiters, and we have 20,000 candidates on this, with 5,900 VR staff from around the country. And again, that's growing. We're bringing on partners. It's exciting to see how we can support each other. We also have VR training centers, and you'll see from the listing, they're in all the states in the east and the middle part of the country. We don't really have these VR-sponsored training centers out on the west coast and the western part of the country. But what we've done is we've learned from those training centers, curriculum that they're using, where we've built out partnerships with business. We've been able to pick up that curriculum and move it locally, where we're working with community colleges, community partners, et cetera. And we've also taken several of those models and created business-based training models, use them as to launch apprenticeships, internships, and also moving to virtual training. The Imagine Academy is an online training where you can learn all of the Microsoft software and become certified. There's also boot camps that we're working with to look at the accessibility. And again, how do we build the skill set that gets people qualified for jobs and skilled for the job needs, but also continues their development. When we're working with a company, we look at several things, and at the national level, we do have a lot of national partners, but those partners also have a supply chain. So you'll see that we're working with some large companies, but also working with the smaller companies in the supply chain, as well as working with several companies that have work from home positions, and in the rural and Kristen's on the phone from Alaska, the remote areas of this country. We've got transportation issues. We're looking at more work from home. We talked about the issues with broadband and connectivity. We really need to look at that as a way to enable this very skilled workforce to continue working. And we've also been working closely with agricultural operations. It's really interesting, and I wish I would have included a photo of how you modify farm equipment so that people, after having an accident, can continue working. I'll get that photo to you, Laura, so that you could share it. But there's a lot of things you can do, regardless of the work environment, to make it accessible to people and to, again, continue using their skill sets. So, looking and working with the company in the bigger picture is really important, because what we're talking about is a change in that culture of that company and the way individuals look at the abilities of people and not just the medical label, which often addresses what someone can't do. So we build a plan with a company based on their goals, based on their footprint, where they want to go, and we have the capacity to bring a team in around them and share across state. A few quick examples. Lowe's. We've had a partnership with Lowe's for a long time, and for all of you in your home project area, I know how much you love Lowe's. So we worked with them and started in a few states in their distribution centers, where they've got 14, and we grew that partnership across the country. So you'll see in the first year we had 556 hires across the country, everywhere from Alabama and Alaska to Wisconsin, Wyoming, and Washington. So again, it's how you use that information across the footprint of a company. And we increased our focus from the distribution side to the retail side, helped them look at developing a centralized accommodation unit, and have continued to support them with retention, supports for interpreter contracts, technical assistance, etc. CVS. CVS is one of our large company partners that just keeps on growing. A lot of people, when they think of healthcare, think of hospitals, and yet CVS is one of the largest healthcare providers in the country. They employ the largest number of nurse practitioners and physical therapists, etc., and pharmacists, of course. And they're working right now on the front lines of this pandemic that we're in. The national partnership here has involved training in retail distribution centers. We've worked with them to develop a pharmacy tech training program that you now can be certified in through an apprenticeship model. And again, we picked up some of the models from the training centers and have moved them across the country. They operate minute clinics. They own a company called Quorum, which provides in-home care. They operate all of the pharmacies in Target. They have work from home positions. We're working with them now as they're shifting to that customer base work from home. And we continue to support them. They've also just recently acquired Aetna. So again, a big company partner in the healthcare arena. Starbucks, one of my favorites living in the Washington area. So we've started with them in Carson Valley, Nevada, where we developed an Inclusion Academy model where they wanted to support a roasting plant, and developed it there with a community college partner, developed some pre-employment training, started bringing high school students in summer work to take a look at that. We picked up that curriculum and moved it to York, Pennsylvania, where they have another large roasting plant. We've now developed those training programs. We're seeing people being hired. We're working on the transportation, because often these large distribution centers or roasting plants, et cetera, are in the rural areas. So we work up front with the company to look at that. We're moving that model to Sandy Run, South Carolina. We've done retail, and we've worked heavily around their wounded warriors and transitioning student programs, because disability crosses all of the other diversity categories in their focus. And last but not least, partnerships with companies like Microsoft, where they have a neurodiversity initiative. They have now hired 110 individuals on the autism spectrum who are in engineering roles, and it was because they shifted the way they interviewed. They moved from a 45-minute interview process to a week-long working interview, and accessed a whole group of individuals because they looked at how they looked at their talent initially in a different way. Microsoft worked with us to reach out and bring in Hewlett-Packard out of Boise, Idaho. They've now picked up that model. They're doing summer internships where we're bringing candidates in from around the country. And that continues to expand. Microsoft also has focused on their supply chain and a number of companies that are working with them to supply a number of products and support services in all of their operations. The Microsoft project has also expanded on the neurodiversity spectrum to their location in Fargo, North Dakota. So what they learned in their corporate headquarters, we were able to take and leverage that same type of a model in the Fargo area and support the company there. Amazon, that is a growing company. We've got several positions that we're working on them right now, whether it's, picking and packing orders in distribution centers, delivering orders, looking at how we build the talent pipeline. And with Amazon, a big focus is the retention piece. So how do we keep people working when they acquire a disability? State as a model employer, you've heard about that. I want to hit upon that briefly because we have several projects actually in the work across the country, and we're learning from each other. Governor support is always key. We want to develop that support from that level, but also develop the relationships with the Department of Personnel or Human Resources and the Voc Rehab Agency. We've done a lot of cross-training. We're looking at how disability fits into an overall diversity and inclusion strategy for the state. We've looked at the accessibility of the hiring process, and many state agencies are using a process now that's similar to the Schedule A process that the federal government uses, where VR and other partners can certify an individual as having a disability, so they qualify for a hiring process that's designed to be proactively recruiting skilled candidates who happen to have a disability. And then again, we continue to work on any type of internship or training opportunities and providing supports, as well as, again, those key retention pieces. How do we keep people working? Which I think benefits all of us. So that's my short overview, and there is my contact information if you'd like to talk more, and thank you for the opportunity.
Kathy, thank you. Thank you for your very important work and for sharing your expertise with us today. Batting cleanup is Kristen Vandergriff. Kristen.
Well, hello, everyone. I'm really excited to be able to join everybody here today from Alaska. Talk to you a little bit about Alaska's employment impact as we look at this theme of reimagining disability employment policy in the rural West. So as we move forward here, a slide that I always like to really start with, showing our population and our size and distance, really give you the breadth and depth of our geographic size and comparatively small population. Give you a little picture of some of the scope of Alaska's rural and remote nature, as Kathy mentioned, and really it kind of gets to the heart of some of the challenges that really correspond with that. You see our huge size, and yet we have a pretty limited road system. We rely heavily on airplanes, float planes, and in some instances for our smaller villages, getting in between them, dog sled or snow machine, right? So when we think of rural and remote, we definitely do have quite a bit in that area. So to kind of start off, I always like to start with this statement. Employment is a huge aspect of adult life. It's something that's really grounded a lot of our work. It's what we hear from stakeholders. And yet, it's really been brought quite home to me when we think about expectations for people with disabilities. This has not historically been an expectation. We still struggle with this today. I really got into this work years ago because my little brother was diagnosed at birth with very significant intellectual and developmental disabilities. As he grew up, and I was really struck by how we'd be in these community event situations together. We'd be out in the community, we'd be introduced to new people. They'd ask both of us our names, and yet for him, they would not ask, what do you do, sir? You know, they would always ask it of me, but he would never get asked that question. There was not an expectation that he would have a job or be employed. That's really, to me, at the heart of the examples of really where Alaska's tried to focus its work. When we talk about increasing expectations and shifting paradigms, that's really been a cornerstone for us. And we've done this in many different ways, but today I'm just going to highlight some of the biggest. The policy changes that Alaska has worked on, its collaborative strategy in regards to employer engagement, as well as a really strong emphasis on transition, especially looking at specific targets and efforts around our rural and remote areas and traditional skills. So in regards to policy changes, we've had several that I think have really helped propel Alaska towards much more inclusive employment for all of its citizens. The first one, 2014, we had Alaska Employment First Law come into be. Integrated competitive employment is now the first and preferred outcome in the provision of publicly funded services for Alaskans with disabilities. This also includes, for the departments listed, an annual reporting requirement in regards to their progress at getting towards that integrating and competitive employment. In Alaska, we found a huge employment barrier to be our high school graduation qualifying exam. In 2014, we also were able to see this repealed with a retroactive provision to allow students that otherwise would have met what they needed to get their diploma go back and obtain that so that they would have an easier time being able to get jobs. In 2016, we saw the Alaska ABLE Act be able to come into being, and this has been for us a really huge employment empowerment tool with the ability to be able to save and not risk that vital loss of public benefits like Medicaid, SSI, really huge empowerment tool. And we've done a lot of presentations as a council to make sure that those in Alaska are aware of these awesome opportunities. All along the way through these policy developments, our council, based on stakeholder input, has really been there to advocate for these positive policy changes. The most recent one, 2018, Alaska was able to repeal some minimum wage regulation in our state. It's only the third state to do this, but this has been a strong focus for us over the last probably decade, really looking at ways that we can focus towards that competitive and integrated employment. So for us, this was really led by our Department of Labor, specifically our Division of Vocational Rehabilitation, in partnership through a lot of grant work. And what isn't on this slide, but I should mention, also happened very recently, was we were able to put into state statute essentially a developmental disability shared vision that really provides a paradigm, really where we want to get to as far as meaningful person-directed lives for Alaskans with disabilities. But what's really important is it includes specific terminology about a job being one of those cornerstones when we think about a meaningful life. So that's some of our current policy changes that have happened based on, again, increasing expectations. When we get to our collaborative employer engagement strategy, this was really something out of federal grant work where we realized we had all these different departments and divisions doing this great work with employers, but employers were super busy and they needed just this one-stop shop to kind of be able to get all the different state resources together to understand what can they do to hire and retain people with disabilities. And we really wanted to maximize effectiveness. So as a collaboration with our Departments of Health and Social Services, Labor and Workforce Development, which included DVR as well as our Job Center Network, we really got together and created this kind of team bringing all of these agencies together, dedicated it to meeting the workforce needs of Alaska businesses while improving hiring outcomes for veterans and individuals with disabilities. We took a lot of different strategies that the different agencies were doing and melded them together. That included really networking and presentations, specific outreach to our Society of Human Resource Management, the SHRM. This has been a wonderful partnership. We've actually co-sponsored for their state conference the last 3 big speakers that they've had. So we've brought up folks from Job Accommodation Network, Project Search nationally, as well as local hiring managers that really can kind of speak that language, but do come from state government and have the knowledge of all those great resources that can be brought to bear for businesses. Connecting with chambers of commerce, state and local, as well as really focusing on frequent employer engagement events. We did state agency networking sessions for employers where different state agencies would provide all the great tools that they had to offer and really have that Q&A back and forth with employers to see where their needs were, really how we could tailor things, trainings to fit and provide them what would best benefit them for hiring and maintaining that workforce. Working with Office of Federal Contract Compliance Programs in Alaska, we have a very high amount of federal contractors. realizing that Section 503 has a 7% utilization goal, we really wanted to make sure that we tailored some specific training as well as resources and connections for those employers that are federal contractors. So we had a very specific focus on that. We also provided a yearly Employment First job fair, marketed it very specifically to individuals with disabilities, veterans. It was open to everyone, but we really made sure that employers and job seekers alike realized that this was a big focus of this fair. And as you can see on the bottom, we've had some pretty big success, most times more than 1,000 job seekers coming through, anywhere from usually 60 to 85 or more employer booths, highlighted on the news many times. So it's one that's grown, and it's now in its 5th or 6th year. So we're pretty excited about where that's come. The reason for all of this, we knew we had heard, as far as the employer social norms, kind of perspectives on hiring for people with disabilities, we kept hearing these fears about, well, I'm not sure, I don't understand accommodations, or, you know, like Kathy said, you know, the unknowns, just not knowing what to ask for in these things, and just sometimes those unknowns preventing people from taking that next step. So we really wanted to have some great data behind it. In 2015 and 2018, we did this employer survey, this comparative report, later on in 2018. And I think what we found coming out of this surprised most of us. When you look at the graphic in our bottom right corner, employer comfort in hiring individuals with disabilities. We kind of anticipated that there were going to be a lot of people neutral. They just kind of didn't know exactly, but they didn't really want to say one way or the other. As you can see, the majority were actually in uncomfortable and very uncomfortable when it came to their perspective as far as hiring people with disabilities. Keep in mind, this is right after we did, you know, some huge presentations, bringing in folks to bring all these resources. There still was this disconnect as far as, even though the majority had hired somebody with a disability and had worked out well for them, there was a disconnect about applying that great experience with that person in that job class to other great people with disabilities that could be prospective employees to other different jobs that they might have to offer. And so for us, it's really come down to getting those internships, the apprenticeships, connection with, as was mentioned in some of the earlier presentations, technology that shows the great skills that folks are doing, that they have and that they bring to the table. But this has been really helpful for us in just informing our strategies moving forward with employers. We know it's a huge piece of the pie. Sorry, I'm trying to advance the slides and it was going a little bit slow on my part. I apologize. Make sure that I don't lose any here. Okay, perfect. So the other big facet that our council really realized when we wanted to impact transition, impacting employment, you have to impact transition. We had a lot of stakeholders come to us and say, you know, we need this one-stop shop. We need information all in one place so we can really set students up for success in adult life, including employment. So we put together with our council, and this was written by a sibling as well as an individual with a disability, everything that they kind of wish they had, everything that we heard from stakeholders needed to be in here. State and federal resources and programs that are available, benefits and work. How do you understand that interplay between the two? The benefits myth and the fear that exists in regards to that is huge and real, and it prevents people from pursuing employment. We wanted to make sure that we had tools in there that would give people that next step to say, I can do this. I might need to figure out some things, but I can try. Rural transition resources. We know that this is a great tool for our whole state, but we know that there are some other things that need to be thought about in rural aspects, and I have a slide for that a little bit later. Employment rights in the ADA, hugely important to be able to know. Technology resources, we've talked a lot about that in this particular webinar. Self-employment in Alaska, we have a very high amount of self-employment per capita. So this is something we knew was going to be important to address, but specifically for our population, self-employment is sometimes the most successful. So we really wanted to make sure that that was a robust resource. Self-advocacy and understanding how to advocate for yourself on an accommodation, whether it's in the process of applying for a job or in keeping your job. Success stories, being able to envision that this kind of employment first can really work for you, being able to see individuals with disabilities, parents, educators, businesses that have all said, this is something that can work. We found that we were able to get thousands printed. We've got them to all of our 54 school districts across the state several times with different revisions. It's been downloaded thousands of times, but I think the biggest thing I could say with getting this kind of a resource into the hands of everybody that's going to need it at that point of transition, as we've done these presentations, we've had parents, we've had students come in tears just saying, this is what I needed to just feel like I could make this next step, to know it's all in one place. I can take the booklet with me, whether I'm meeting with DVR, going to the job center, you know, getting additional resources from other agencies. They just know it's all in one place and they can access it, and that's huge. So this is one where we're always happy if other states want to look at kind of developing one on their own. We're happy to be a resource on kind of the process we did, stakeholder engagement to create this. And so Alaska, the big picture of employment, I promised some aspects of how we really tackled rural and remote regions around employment. And again, realizing that transition is such a pivotal time, we knew that our handbook was going to be helpful, but that it wouldn't tell the whole story for everything that our rural and remote regions would need. As a little picture, there is wage employment in these areas, but it's very different than our urban areas. You have government services, you might have education administration, post office, things like that. Fishing and processing, transportation, mining, drilling, tourism, retail. Many of these things have a very seasonal nature to them. But what's really important to realize is equally or sometimes even more so present in our regions that are rural and remote, informal employment, gig, really kind of that gig economy, trade, reciprocity, and subsistence. So really realizing that those things make up what would be a normal, commensurate adult economic activity. We wanted to make sure that students with disabilities were getting those traditional Alaska skills at their time of transition so that as they went into adulthood, they could stay in their home community and be successful in whatever that economic activity looked like. So this is our first couple of units, the links here if you ever want to check those out. We're developing 2 more right now that are really focused on self-employment, creative industries, but we go through things like water safety, hunting safety, all these different kind of things that folks would need to be able to know to be successful in that kind of environment. And we definitely wanted to do a shout out to the really important things that have been able to support our progress. So Alaska was the beneficiary of an Administration on Community Living Federal Partnerships and Employment Grant. I can't say enough how huge this was for our state in providing that funding to really dig deep to create that transition handbook to set the stage for the policy change that was able to occur. Those things wouldn't have happened without those funding resources and partners coming together in that way. The Alaska Mental Health Trust Authority, they have a beneficiary employment and engagement initiative that has provided funding towards these efforts. It's been huge, long-lasting outcomes and invaluable towards moving this forward. And then also to the State Exchange on Employment and Disability, SEED, the technical assistance we've been able to receive to continue to move these policy aspects in regards to employment forward have been really imperative. And just to give folks a little picture, there we go. Sorry, the slide was a little slow. On where Alaska is going next in respect to working with SEED and technical assistance. We're trying to create an Alaska Work Matters or Alaska Works task force to really fully implement employment first, state as a model employer efforts, and grow on the progress we've been able to have on high-level leadership forums around employment, also in regards to our Empowerment Through Employment conference, moving those aspects forward on a policy front. But the other big thing that we see going forward that I'm sure many states are starting to contend with and think through their next steps, but really looking at a collaborative COVID-19 employment response. So this is right now in Alaska, our Division of Vocational Rehabilitation is leading this effort with our council and other partners, but really looking at how we can best support individuals with disabilities who are employed or who want to become employed, and that includes folks that may have lost their job during the pandemic. So really making sure that we're getting in front of this as best as we can, realizing that financial health will be really important to consider in addition to the physical and emotional health as we work to get towards long-term recovery from this pandemic. So this is something that our council believes in really strongly is going to be an important facet of our work moving forward.
Well, Kristen, thank you so very much. We've got about 20 minutes remaining for a panel discussion, and I'd like to invite our entire webinar audience to submit questions, and you do that by using the attendee chat feature on the webinar platform. In the meantime, I've got some presenter-specific questions, but I want to start with a question for the entire panel or anybody who'd like to address this. We hear a lot about the urban-rural divide, and that manifests itself in political thought and digital access and economic opportunity. Let's talk for a minute about the urban-rural divide with respect to access for the disabled. Is there a stark contrast with respect to access, and how do your individual efforts differ in rural areas vis-a-vis urban areas? Anybody? Bobby, have you confronted that in your work on the ADA?
Well, not on the work on the ADA, but as legislative counsel for the State Exchange on Employment and Disability, we have really tried to, when we provide examples of policy options, really try to look to both urban and rural states to make sure that the Work Matters report and everything else we do reflects the diversity of the country, so that a policy option that works for one state may not work for another. But if you go to our documents, you will typically see that the examples are both urban and rural states. So, for example, in terms of telework, we'll have examples ranging from Maryland to Oklahoma. In terms of on disability-owned businesses, we'll try to have examples ranging from Oregon to Delaware. So that's the way we've addressed it, to make sure that the policy options described in our documents are reflective of the urban-rural divide.
So, Aaron, they say everything's bigger in Texas. Does that apply to the urban-rural divide around access as well?
Absolutely. Some of the biggest cities in the country, and some of the most rural areas as well. I think, picking up on what Bobby said, certainly some of these solutions are going to have to be individually tailored. Now, a lot of the digital-based solutions can be made readily available, and we constantly look at if we can make things digital, and assuming the infrastructure is in place to provide broadband access, then connectivity for rural areas, it sort of that divide begins to melt away, because if you're accessing telehealth services, whether it's consultation with a doctor about a virus, or it could be mental and behavioral health consultations with a provider, that can melt those miles, and it's a paradigm that both can participate in. Where it gets a little bit more difficult, obviously, is with services like personal care attendants, where you may need physically somebody to be there, or you may need to be able to physically go to that. In a city, we already know, let's say, mental health providers are, even in large cities, have huge wait lists. And never mind the ability to get there once you do get an appointment. If you're in rural areas, it may be 100 miles before, to travel one way just to be able to get to that. And, never mind, what Kristen was talking about, which might be 1,000 miles. But in some ways, 1,000 miles and 100 miles can be just as big of a barrier if you don't really have access to transportation. And that's another part of it, where hopefully technology will be able to provide more accessible and on-demand ability to get from point A to point B, assuming that that when you still physically need to go from point A to point B, if the technology just is not appropriate for whatever that interaction is.
So Kathy, you talked about states as model employers, and you emphasize that the governor's support is key. Can you cite an example where a governor's support has really made a difference, or alternatively, just talk about messaging or strategies the governors could employ to better support the disabled community, particularly with respect to workforce opportunities?
Sure. And I know we've been watching, how the state as a model employer has been implemented in multiple states, and I'm happy to share what we found. But in those that have been successful, there's been a real visible commitment by the governors to look at the talent and to, really address candidates with disabilities based on their talent and their skill sets. And I think, also featuring examples of success and looking at policies at the state level that may be a barrier in and of themselves because they hadn't considered access. So I know in one example, one state, we started looking at some of the job descriptions, and one of the job descriptions, this is not going to be news to Bobby or other people, but it required someone be able to drive. Well, in all actuality, that position required someone to be able to get from point A to point B. You didn't necessarily have to drive your own vehicle to get there. So, taking a look and taking the leadership to take a look at where there are unintended consequences of policies or processes at the state level. And, governors have been key in that, and just the commitment. And, there are many governors that have individuals with disabilities on their own staff. So they model the way. And I think that's a key piece.
That's great. Thank you very much, Catherine. Yeah.
This is Bobby. If I could just respond also. Again, in what we do at the C Project is we will identify, we track every executive order that has been issued that deals with disability. So if you want to know, ranging from governor from state of Washington, his executive order to Minnesota to Kentucky just did Work Matters through an executive order from the governor. We have a list of all of the state legislation as well as the executive orders that have deal specifically with state as a model employer, whether it's forming task forces or specific strategies.
Thank you. Kristen, you spoke in both personal and professional terms about the discomfort that people, and particularly employers, might feel around the disabled and around hiring individuals with disabilities. How can governors and others start to kind of normalize and support those necessary conversations about disability in the workplace?
It's been interesting as we've had a lot of our state agency networking sessions, really just employers realizing the tools that are out there so that everything isn't such a scary kind of unknown, that there's so many things to support them, whether it's job accommodation network or having so many of the different state resources. I think it's having those conversations. But as we really finished our comparative report at the end of 2018, the biggest thing that came out that was different in the recommendations we had in the earlier report from 2015 was that we're bringing these great experts to the table to say, here are all the wonderful resources we have, here's how you can do it. But what we're missing is actually having successful employed people with disabilities up there on the stage too at that same time. So as Alaska's looked at retooling its own employer engagement and just all those efforts, it's really making sure that those people with disabilities that have been successful are able to tell their story. And I think that is a big piece of the conversation, that while it might be there in pockets right now, it needs to be a huge focus going forward. That's the feedback we've gotten from stakeholders, is that this is what we need to start doing. So that's a piece that our council has really taken to heart. And as we do our employer engagement efforts, we are making sure that whether it is a co-presentation or having an employed individual with a disability be that main keynote, that is where our next bit of the journey is leading us.
Thank you. Aaron, you're involved in a wide variety of technologies that are designed to improve remote and telework opportunities, and you talked about a couple of those. Could you either elaborate on some of these more successful applications, or better yet, tell us about some of the new technologies that are coming down the pipeline.
Sure. I think the telework is, before it was, kind of thought of as, well, you're just going to be on the phone and having a phone, but, and certainly not every job, but, so many more jobs are being mediated by technology, that beyond just the communication, but how we prepare and what we deliver. A data analyst may used to have to deal with paper reports and things like that, and now that can be done, now that data is digitalized, being able to manage it through a spreadsheet or a database or these sorts of things, and it may not even be local. That is, telework might have been a big heavy computer in your own home, but more and more, you just need a fairly lightweight device, sometimes even a mobile device, an iPad or other type of tablet might work just as well, and the heavy lifting of that telework is being done in a data center somewhere else, and so you don't necessarily need quite the infrastructure. One of the downsides of that, though, can be if the setup of that telework arrangement has not considered assistive technologies. As an example, a screen reader for somebody who's blind, or switch devices for somebody with physical disabilities. It may not support that assistive technology. And so, I mentioned with state governments ensuring representation of people with disabilities on boards and councils, and I would say the same goes for inside, private companies, employers as well. That are you leveraging a resource like an employee resource group that may have a disability focus to surface concerns about internal accessibility? So not just making your public website or mobile app or products and services accessible, but what are you doing to make sure the tools inside the company for the employees are accessible? And that's not just an HR function. And in fact, a lot of times, HR is trying to think about the broad perspective, making sure that the voice of employees with disabilities are heard, so that a lot of the physical barriers that we may have seen in the past aren't being perpetuated with the digital barriers. There's nothing inherently inaccessible about zeros and ones with digital technology. But it's how we put it together. And if we're not thinking about consciously people with disabilities and designing technology to be inclusive of their needs, then almost all the time we unintentionally create those barriers, and then that just makes it far more difficult to employ and retain and advance. And what I love to hear what Kristen's saying about making sure representation is seen, that we expect people with disabilities to work, that we see them out not only in a variety of jobs, not just one set of jobs, but everything from jobs of at the most basic entry level, but all the way up through management and highly technical positions.
Great. Thank you, Aaron.
Jim,
yes, sir.
Jim, this is Bobby. If I could just jump in again, the state of Pennsylvania asked us to do a comprehensive policy brief for them, and one of their issues, because they're one of the most rural states in the country, was telework programs in terms of policy. So we identified that Nebraska and Virginia offer tax credits to employers who offer telework. Georgia, Maryland, Oklahoma, all have telework programs or pilot projects for state agency employees. So again, the seat can be a resource if folks are interested specifically in what other states are doing in telework. We have a bunch of examples.
Kathy, can you talk a little bit about vocational rehabilitation and what those services cost businesses?
Sure. The message I always love to deliver is vocational rehab is taxpayer dollars back at work in your communities and in business. And we know at the minimum every dollar that we invest in keeping people working or getting them to work or back to work shows a $12 return on investment. So it is a program that, I'm proud to say returns investment to the community overall. So those services come at no cost to business.
That's great. Thank you very much. Well, this has been a fascinating and dynamic discussion, and I'm so appreciative of the participation of the panelists and sharing their expertise and their wisdom and their knowledge. We at WGA have been investing a lot of resources into this in this initiative, and have a team of folks working on it. I want to thank Lauren Danino and Lauren Cloward and Kevin Moss, and particularly Laura Cutlip, who organized this particular webinar. And just to kind of recap some of the themes and to provide some closing remarks, I'd like to recognize Laura now.
Thanks, Jim. And I just want to say that I think this has been a great discussion, really touched on the critical nature of the inclusive disability employment policies, specifically in the rural West. As mentioned, this is really a window of opportunity to highlight the work that's being done through the 30th anniversary of the ADA, and we have this opportunity to encourage the private sector to increase their acceptance and employment of those disabilities and progress policies. We've heard about a number of resources made available by states, schools, companies, and other organizations to address discrimination and celebrate policy advancements and initiatives taken by those entities. We've also heard about resources to address a smooth and just transition for individuals with disabilities from education to a career path, as well as a plethora of new technologies that have played an increasingly important role, not only in helping those with disabilities be successful in their jobs, but achieving employment in the first place. And our speakers addressed making assumptions and building trust and understanding around disability employment, and I think that today's conversation will really be a great tool in taking down those barriers. So I want to thank everybody again for taking the time to participate in today's webinar, and I hope you all stay safe and healthy.
Thank you.